Disclaimer, this video is speculative in nature. We don't have the changes on our hands yet, so we are not able to test exact values here, so we are just using the 30% damage buff that was mentioned in the TWAB. That said, enjoy the video. Alright, let's hop right into it. So, I decided that we would start off with a little bit of a baseline, so our new regular old rocket launcher with impact casing. In case you didn't know, impact casing increases the overall damage of the rocket because it increases the direct hit damage. It's basically spike nades for rocket launchers. And so here in the background, I shoot the Lost Sector boss, and then I'm going to show off me shooting off basically all of my reserves. And we're going to graph that in Excel, going frame by frame of when I shot rockets so that we can actually get a trend line for our damage. I've found that actually using a trend line gives you a much better idea of what the rocket actually serves as a function for damage, because not everything is good based on sold DPS. And so when we plug it in here, if you look at the graph that I made, up in the top right hand corner, you actually have the equation for the trend line of this data set. And basically that number next to the X, that is your DPS. That's the amount of damage you are doing from second to second. That is your DPS. And on the right hand side is essentially your, it's an estimate of the burst DPS. And so we can tell from looking at this equation that our rocket is going to do around 53,000 burst DPS and then do about 23,000 DPS going from there. And so you can actually use this equation to give an estimate of how much damage you're going to do at any point, depending on how long your damage window is. So say you have a 10-second damage window, you just plug it into that equation, come out with a number, and then that is your estimate. And we're going to actually be using this later to compare all of our results. The second thing that I decided to test was actually a Demolitionist rocket launcher. The reason why this is good is it's like a regular rocket launcher, but you can start off by shooting a rocket, throwing a grenade, and shooting a rocket again, and it does a little mini reload for you. And if you have something like Starfire Protocol, you could do that twice even. And this gives us a little bit better overall burst damage, but similar DPS to our regular rocket launcher. The next thing I decided to test was actually Izanagi's Burden plus a auto-loading holster rocket launcher. And so using our rocket launcher, adjusted rocket launcher damage from the Lost Sector boss earlier, and shooting off Izanagi, and the actual timing of this is you shoot off Izanagi, reload your shot, swap to the rocket, shoot it once, swap back to Izanagi, repeat. And you can see that on the screen here, and this actually gives us the highest DPS we've seen yet. This is very similar to the hot swap Wendigo that we had back when Pinnacles weren't sunset, and it gives us an actually pretty good DPS overall with around 32,000 estimate, with a good burst DPS as well. It's not as high burst DPS as our Demolitionist rocket, but it is definitely nothing to scoff at, and this, we'll actually be able to see this a little bit later. The next thing that is important to think about is our exotics, right? Wardclef Coil, I have no idea how or if they're going to fix that, because they did mention in the TWAB that exotics are going to be balanced differently. So I didn't want to go over too many exotics in this video because the information could be irrelevant in 2 weeks. So instead, I just decided to hit everyone's favorite raid rocket launcher, the Eyes of Tomorrow, and there's a reason for this. Eyes of Tomorrow right now has absurd burst DPS, but it has a 50% damage reduction versus boss enemies. This is your strike bosses, anything like that, and champions are included in that 50% reduction. And so pretty much anything that you would need that high burst DPS for takes less damage from it, and that's actually a little bit annoying right now. And so for this Eyes of Tomorrow test, I decided that the guess at the future change that I think they're going to make the Eyes of Tomorrow is that they're going to keep the 50% damage reduction against bosses, but still hit it with the same 30% damage that other rockets got. And the reason for me saying that, you guys will see in a second. So getting damage numbers for both adaptive ordnance and not adaptive ordnance, and then reducing that value by 50% for bosses, and then giving it a 1.3 times damage multiplier, we can actually get our trend line that looks a little bit something like this. And this is the highest burst DPS we've seen so far, with kind of one of the worst overall DPS values we've seen so far. And this is important because this doesn't mean Eyes of Tomorrow is bad. That initial spike in damage actually makes Eyes of Tomorrow very good for short damage windows. And when we scroll down here in a second, I'll have a comparison of everything and what that damage looks like. To put all of these damage numbers and all of these graphs and all this Excel junk data into perspective, I decided that the best idea would be to use some sort of damage option that's pretty popular right now that isn't getting nerfed in Season 13. And so the two things I settled on are Cloud Strike and Anarchy plus a Slug Shotgun. And so showing Cloud Strike here, I will save you guys having to watch me shoot Cloud Strike into a wall and get storm damage numbers and all that stuff, and I'll just show you the data. So, looking at Cloud Strike, we actually see that it has the highest DPS so far. That's a second-to-second DPS, not counting your first initial burst. And that makes sense because Cloud Strike is starting off with its just regular old shot, and it ramps up its damage as you go down the magazine. And so your burst damage is decent, but your overall DPS is what matters. And we can actually see that in action with that equation there, which has less burst DPS than the rockets, but way more overall DPS. And then scrolling down to the Anarchy and Slug Shotgun, we have something very interesting. So Anarchy and Slug Shotguns don't have a lot of initial burst DPS. You're not going to be doing a whole lot over a very short time period, but they have a very, very steep DPS value because you're doing so much damage over time, second to second, mostly because of Anarchy. So if you look at it here, we actually have basically no burst damage, but we have a very good amount of overall DPS. And this is where everything comes together. I have made a scatter plot with everything combined, and this might be hard to look at for a second until you really realize what exactly is going on. So, basically, whenever something is on top, that means it is the best DPS option for that time frame. And what this means is our Anarchy Slug combo is going to start out on the bottom, but then once you get to about 6.5 to 7 seconds into any damage phase, it automatically jumps to the top option and nothing can really even make up that gap. And this is because of how much damage over time it's doing, and that makes sense. The most interesting thing about this is that our three rocket options, our Eyes of Tomorrow, the Demolitionist rocket, and the regular rocket launcher, all start out as the best options, but then once you get about 8 seconds in, become the worst options. And this, I think, is what Rocket's roles are going to be. They're going to be good for taking down pretty much anything that dies relatively quickly, or that their damage window is very short. Atrax. Pretty much any strike boss, because all of them put up an immune shield after you do too much damage. Anything that isn't basically Taniks or Riven or any of the Garden of Salvation bosses, or pretty much any raid boss with a big health bar except for Atrax, you're not going to want to use a rocket in those encounters. But pretty much anywhere else where everything dies pretty much instantly anyways, I think that rocket launchers are going to be meta. And this puts them in a very healthy spot for the game, in my opinion. If you look at the graph, we can see that Eyes of Tomorrow just edges out, doing the best DPS pretty much in the game for any DPS window shorter than 5 seconds, which gives me a lot of hope. And I really am looking forward to seeing if Bungie cops out and doesn't give Eyes of Tomorrow the buff. I'll be very sad, but I'm excited to see where this goes. Like I said, this spreadsheet will be in a Google Drive download in the description if you're interested. please feel free to check over things with me. I'm sorry if this video was a little bit confusing. I'm kind of going off rip here. And so, that said, thank you all for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. See you guys next time. Ciao.